podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome back to the Paddock and The Pavilion with me, Stephen Wallace. Today we're returning to the world of horse racing with the master of suspense and intrigue, Felix Francis. Felix is here to chat about his latest unputdownable horse racing thriller, Syndicate. Get ready for just over 30 minutes with a master storyteller. Welcome back, Felix, to the Paddock and the Pavilion.
Thank you, Stephen. It's lovely to be back here.
How are you after last week's book launch?
Oh, I'm very well. I've done an awful lot since then. I've had signings at Hatchards on Wednesday. I had some radio shows to do. On Friday, I went to Lords to watch the England one-day international team stuff the Aussies by 186 runs, which was the best day of the week. And then over the weekend, I spoke at the Marlborough Literary Festival and also the Richmond Walking and Book Festival. Now, that's Richmond, North Yorkshire. So I spent most of Sunday on a train and going up and most of yesterday coming back. So I've had a good week.
It sounds like you have had a good week. It's always good to see England beat the Australians. And apologies to all our Australian listeners. It was great for me last Tuesday to meet Harry Herbert, or should I say Chester Newton. We're going to come on to the book shortly, but first time I'd met him, although I'd interviewed him on this podcast in episode 246.
Well, you wouldn't miss him. He was the tallest man in the room by about 6 inches. Harry is a larger than life, both in reality and in his personality. And it was lovely to see him because he greatly helped me with the research for Syndicate.
Do you enjoy the book launches, book signings?
They are the best day of my whole year. I have all my friends there. My friends buy books, so I don't have to give them to them. It is a wonderful occasion. We had well over 100 people in the room. We had some journalists. We had friends, lots of my friends. And we had quite a good turnout on in the press the following morning or the day after, because we had some interesting guests. And one of my dearest friends, I don't know whether you've interviewed him, Miles Jupp, who loves his cricket. He was there and he stayed right to the end, and everyone had a great fun talking to him. He had everyone in stitches.
He was on Test Match Special with Aggers quite recently. I'm sure I heard him.
Well, he wrote a book. I can't remember exactly what it was. It was, but he went on tour to India with the England cricket team and lied his way into the press room. It was all, he said he was, I think he said he was the cricket correspondent of the Horse and Hound. And it's an absolutely wonderful story. It's something in the heat. It's absolutely brilliant. And Miles loves his cricket. And I've done things with him before. I've been on Just a Minute with him. And that's really the most scary thing you can do in the whole world. But it is a lot of fun. But it's in the days of dear Nicholas Parsons. But it is very scary indeed when Nicholas says you have 1 minute to speak about places you go on your holiday starting now. And you have to just speak. If you don't speak, you know that Mars, if you don't speak instantly, you know that Mars is going to push the button and say hesitation. So it's very much thinking as you speak on that one.
Let's talk about Syndicate, another unputdownable book. Firstly, can you let listeners know a bit of a synopsis of the book? No spoilers, of course.
Of course, no spoilers. No. Syndicate is, as the name suggests, about owning horses in syndicates. Chester Newton is my main character. And the book starts at Epsom on Derby Day, where his horse called Potassium is favourite for the Derby. And Potassium is the front runner. And the book opens with the words, I was hardly daring to breathe not trying to move an inch, but my heart was beating so fast in my chest I thought it would come straight out. Come on, come on. I didn't so much say it as think it. And Potassium wins the Derby by a nose, swamped by other horses, but just after the line. And it is, you can imagine that Chester is in seventh heaven and all the syndicate members are crowding into the winner's circle. But that night, he has a party. It's a prearranged party for his wedding anniversary, but it turns into a party as celebration of the Derby. And during the party, his 18-year-old daughter goes missing. She's meant to make a speech and no one can find her. And they search and search and eventually call the police. And the daughter is found 9 miles away, drugged but otherwise unharmed, much to Chester's relief. But he gets a phone call from someone who says, I wanted to show you how easy it was to take your daughter. And if you don't run your horses as I want, the next time she comes home, it will be in a body bag. And then shortly afterwards, he gets another call saying a certain horse has got to lose an upcoming race. And Chester has the dilemma of whether to break the most sacrosanct regulation in the horse racing rule book or put his daughter in mortal danger. And I don't going to say any more about the book because I don't want to give anything away. That's all in the first chapter or chapter and a half. So, but it's a good, I like to think it's a good story. I mean, I've had some wonderful reviews and people that have read it seem to like it. And in fact, Harry Herbert, of course, who you've had on your program, who runs Highclere Thoroughbred Racing Limited, and is one of the preeminent syndicate managers in the United Kingdom. He read it before it went in to the publishers to check it for me, and he loves it. So he as he said the other night when I saw him at my launch party, that do you want to call me Chester from now on? But it's not quite Harry, but it's close.
I hope it's not. No.
No, there's certain things he gets up to which I don't think Harry would get up to. But Chester is certainly in a hole, and the book is about how he gets out of it.
Yeah, he's got a lot on his plate, Chester Newton. How did you come up with the idea?
Well, I've written 17 books. The Syndicate is number 18, and my dad wrote 39, and that's 57 books. It's or 56 books. It's hard to find a new story that you haven't that hasn't been done before. That's the worst bit every year. And I thought, well, so many people now seem to be owning parts of horses. I mean, you can buy a part of a horse in a syndicate for as little as 50 quid these days. I mean, these aren't those sort of syndicates. These are syndicates in the book are more high end. So it's costing you many thousands, but not the 100,000 it normally costs to buy the horse. So I wanted to set it around the idea of syndicates and someone trying to take control of the syndicate horses. And so I've known Harry for many years, and I phoned him up and I said, Harry, I want to write a book about syndicates. I need to pick your brains. Would you have lunch with me? And he said, yes, I'd love to. This was June. I suppose this would have been June 23. So a little over, 16 months ago or so. And I said to Harry, you can choose where we go and I'll pay. So he chose a restaurant in Mayfair and we went there and we had a lovely lunch and I asked him lots of questions. And then I went home and thought about the beginning of the book and I decided to make my character the syndicate manager in in Chester's mould, you might say. But of course, all my main characters are me, really. I mean, they're all a bit younger than I am, and they're certainly a lot thinner than I am, but they're all me, or as I would like me to be. And the book develops. I mean, the characters drive it along, and I had a good idea for a beginning. I went to a party. I went to someone's party. Back in the early part of 23, or maybe it was even 22. And it was a marquee in their garden. It was in Essex. It was a silver wedding party and the birthday party for their children, just as it is in Syndicate. And I said to my wife as we were there, what would people do if one of the children went missing? And how long would you wait before you called the police? What would you actually do? Where would you search? I mean, the whole thing was in a marquee in the garden. The house was being closed off. Would you search the house? Would you search the gardens? How long would it be before you actually called the police to say that one of the children was missing? Those friends didn't actually have a daughter, as happened in the book. They only had sons, but I thought a daughter might make it more, you might call the police rather sooner for a missing daughter than you might for a missing son. And everything I go to is I use somewhere in a book. I love people watching. I've been on a train for the last couple of days, and I've been watching people on the train. I've been watching people at the railway station. I make up stories in my head about where they're going, what they're doing. Are they going home? Are they going to see a lover? Are they going to the betting shop or whatever? And it passes the time on a journey. And so everything I do will sometimes mostly end up in a book.
So did you shadow Harry? Did you go and see him at work? Or
No, I didn't really need to. I knew what it was like to be a syndicate member. I was a syndicate member, one of Harry's syndicates, in one of his, it was meant to be what was called a jumper, but it couldn't jump very well. It was, a few years ago now, what, about 7 or 8 years ago now. I don't want to do Harry down, but I spent quite a lot of money. I mean, a few £1,000s to become a member of the syndicate. So it wasn't a huge amount of money. And the horse ran at the first time at Stratford-upon-Avon in a maiden hurdle race. And there were 5 runners. And the word on the street via the syndicate manager was that the horse should trot up here. He'd finished 4th. He'd have actually finished 5th if one of the others hadn't fallen at the last. And that was the only time he ever made it to a race course. So, as always, when you own horses, there's no guarantees. No one goes into racehorse ownership to make money. I mean, only something like 20% of all horses in training cover their annual cost, let alone the cost of buying the horse in the first place. You go into it because, as Harry said, he's in the luxury goods business, and you go into it because you're buying into a lifestyle of glamour and excitement. If you go into it expecting a return on your investment, then most of the times you're going to be disappointed. However, you do have a chance of winning a lot of money. I mean, in America, the horse Justify was sold for $500,000 US at Keeneland in 2016, which is not a huge amount of money when you consider the record is 15 and something million. The horse only ran 6 times, but it won all 6 of those races, including the Kentucky Derby, the Preakness, and the Belmont Stakes. So it won $3.8 million on the track, but its potential earnings at stud mean that over the next 15 years, it's expected to accumulate over $150 million in stud fees, making it worth 8 times its own weight in pure gold. And I think that is an underestimate, because one of its first progeny was City of Troy, which of course won the Derby this year, and that one result has doubled Justify's stud fee for 2025. So you can make a lot of money on it, but you shouldn't go into it if you think you're going to make money every time, because you're not.
But your fictional horse, Potassium, has won the Derby. How did you come up with his name?
Well, I spent a lot of time on the Weatherby name check, and also on the Racing Post search for horses with names, I want to call them. And quite a few I'd chosen had already been taken, or had been used, or were reserved, because they'd been horses that had won classics in the past. And I resorted to the periodic table, and hydrogen and oxygen had already gone. But I put in potassium, and I couldn't believe that no one had called the horse Potassium. I was so pleased, because I feared that it was going to end up being called Protactinium or a Rutherfordium or Einsteinium. But Potassium was wonderful, and I kept checking all the time I was writing the book, right until the moment it went into the publishers, that no one else had chosen the name, and no one else has. So, but I hope that there might be a horse called Potassium in the future.
How do you come up with the character names? Do you pick friends, people you don't like, people you've met? How do you choose them?
Well, a lot of the names are. I mean, my father did the same. A lot of names are places. So, I mean, in this book, Chester Newton. Well, Chester is a place, and Newton is a place. I mean, I used to own a house in Nosmeo in Devon, and the village across the water was called Newton Ferris. So I use a lot of place names. I had Mark Shillingford in Bloodline, and that Shillingford on Thames. And I've had no end of. I mean, there was Jeff Hinckley, who was in 3 books, and I got that off a road sign which said, the motorway road sign showed the turning off to Hinckley. I called him Chester Newton because I wanted it to be a name. I mean, I have a name which is slightly unusual, Felix. I mean, there are quite a few Felixes around now, but when I was a child, I was the only one. I hated it for a while because I was always called Felix the Cat, or Cat Food, which was even worse when I was at junior school. But now I love having a name that is slightly different. So Chester, well, what came to mind was Chester Barnes, of course. It was famous as a table tennis player, but he was also an assistant trainer in racing. And Chester Newton seemed to fit the bill. And I get to know my character really well. I live with them for 6 months. I know how they feel. I know how they're going to react. I know them so well. I know them inside out. I know them much better than my readers or my publisher, and that is all due to living with them for so long.
And what about the research? There was a depth of research in the book. I must say, I'm a racing fan, but for non-racing fans, you made it very clear about the racing calendar, which is quite mind-boggling to a non-racing fan.
Yeah, but I also think that, I mean, I'm a racing fan. I've been racing all my life, but even I didn't know about, closing dates, supplementary fees. I didn't know any of that. I mean, what I tried to do, I didn't make it I hope I didn't make it boring. I mean, my books aren't about the horses; they're about the people. Racing is simply the canvas against which I paint the human story. But you have to get it right. The research has to be right, and closing dates and choosing which horse. Your horse is a Derby winner. Where do you go next? Which races do you enter into? Which can you, if you've missed the entry date, can you supplement the horse? How much does it cost? All of those things I found fascinating. I hope that readers who read the book won't be bogged down with that, but I hope they come away with the feeling that there is an awful lot more to being a trainer and a syndicate manager than simply making the horse run. You have to decide where it runs, over what distance it runs, whether you're frightened away by any of the opposition, and all of those things. I mean, I say in the book that if you're a syndicate member, and you've got a horse, not a potassium who wins the Derby, but a lesser horse, let's say, you feel a lot better winning a Class 5, Class 5 handicap than you do coming 4th, 5th, and 6th all the time in a Class 2 handicap. And it's about that you understand that the syndicate manager is not simply looking for how well the horse can do in which company. He's always looking ahead to the following year, to being able to sell the shares in the horses he buys at the sales in October. And he wants his syndicate members to come back. And I hope that I have, even someone like you, Stephen, who knows your racing inside out, I hope that you might have learned a few things, and that those who didn't know anything about racing may have learned a lot.
Oh, definitely. I definitely learned things. It's a real human story. And once again, you kept me turning the page over late at night. That's a skill, obviously, thriller writers have.
Well, I sometimes get people coming up to me and saying, Felix, I've got a bone to pick with you. You kept me awake until 5 o'clock in the morning. And part of you thinks, oh, that's great. And then the other part of you thinks, my God, it took me a whole year to write it, and they've read it in one day. But I think that's what every fiction writer wants, every author wants. Writing books is, you have to write them for the reader. You can't write them for yourself. You've got to write them for the reader. And what you've got to do more than anything else is make the reader want to know what happens. You want to make the reader care about what happens to your characters. They don't have to like them. I mean, some of the characters, the villains, you don't want people to like, but you've still got to get to a point where people care what happens to them. If they don't care and they put the book down at night and go to bed, they won't bother to pick it up in the morning. What you want to do is make them want to know what happens. And that's what I try and do. And even though Chester is in some ways a flawed character, I still feel that ultimately people want to know what happens to him in the end. And I think by the end, they're probably rooting for him. But it's always a difficult thing to try and put into a book. Today is the 1st of October. I've just started my new novel this afternoon. I've written one paragraph. I've got to write 90,000 words by the 1st of April. You know, who in my publishers thought it was funny to have the book due on the 1st of April? But that's the and I've got 6 months to write a book, and it's certainly a job of work. I've had many months thinking about it, and so today was the first day, and the first line of the book is "Don't touch me." Right, and that's as much as I'm telling you about it at the moment.
Well, that's an exclusive for me. The 1st of April actually is a very important day because it's my birthday. So that's something
Well,
to remember.
I'm delighted to hear it. I hope you didn't spend your whole childhood getting empty parcels. My brother's birthday, my elder brother's birthday, is also the 1st of April.
As is David Gower as well. And Joffer Archer.
Well, not a bad day. Anyone born on the 10th of February, I'm with you. But not the 1st of April was definitely a day that I was never allowed to go past without some sort of look in when I was a child. Mostly Merrick, my brother, he got parcels with empty parcels with April Fool written inside them.
Enjoying today's episode? You can find my other 2 conversations with Felix in episodes 93 and 230, where we discussed Iced and No Reserve. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, or on our YouTube channel. You said at the book launch that your wife Debbie plays an important role in all your books.
If I can get it past Debbie, I can get it past anyone, is how I feel. Yes, she plays a very important role in things like delivering coffee and red wine and being supportive. But more than that, a lot more than that, she reads the book as I go along, and we discuss it. She reads it out loud to me, and I listen to what my words are. And if they sound like rubbish, they are, so I will rewrite that. And then I stop her reading it when I'm about 2/3 of the book through, because I want to find out what she thinks about it at the end. The denouement. So then, just before the book goes into the publishers, she reads the whole book out loud to me, and I make my final changes. So when the book goes in on the 1st of April, I feel it's finished.
But it's a very important part that she's playing.
Oh, absolutely, because if she doesn't understand something or she thinks I've got something wrong, she won't hesitate to tell me. And yeah, it's a great thing that she assists with it. I mean, we discuss it a lot. She's very supportive, and I'm very lucky to have her helping me with the books.
How then do you reflect as a thriller writer since, I think, 2005, the life of a thriller writer? Has it been as exciting as you thought, successful as you thought?
I would say so. I would say it's certainly been exciting, as I think. Every author wishes they sold more books. But yes, it's been exciting. I've done 18 books in 18 years, so it's been hard work. But it is just the greatest honor to continue writing the Dick Francis novels. I mean, this book may have Felix Francis on the cover, but it also has a Dick Francis novel there too, because to me, Dick Francis is now as a brand rather than an individual. And it is a great honor and joy for me to be able to continue his legacy.
What's the feeling when you've finished a book? Is it satisfaction, relief?
Well, when the book goes in on the 1st of April, I don't hear anything for about 2 or 3 weeks. And that is quite a worrying time. So my wife and I tend to go away at that point. But this year we moved house, so we didn't go away. It's huge satisfaction when it's finished. I mean, I always say I like being an author, but I also say I like it when it's finished. And it's so come April the 1st, if this one is complete and I'm happy with it, I will be a very happy man. Yeah, I mean, of course, when you send the manuscript in, that's not the end of it. You've got the edit, you've got the copy edit, you've got the proofs. The book doesn't really go to bed until June. And then I take rest of June and July off. And then August and September, it's thinking of the next story and 1st of October, it's starting to write it.
Is that similar to how your father, Dick, thought and worked as well?
He used to start later. He would always start after Christmas, 1st of January. I'm not quite sure how he managed to finish a book by May, and then they still published it in September. My publishers wanted earlier and earlier and earlier. So I had to start in October. But yeah, I think so. I think that when the book went in, there was a huge degree of satisfaction that another book was in the can, as it were.
And last time I spoke to you, you recommended one of your father's books to me, Bone Crack, as the best one he did. I have read that one and really enjoyed it. Could you recommend another one of Dick Francis' books for listeners?
Oh, no, I wish I'd had prior warning of that. I mean, I love them all, but Bone Crack was always my favorite because it was the relationship between two fathers and two sons.
And we know the villain at the start in that one, don't we?
Do. And I actually, when I wrote Refusal, it was partly an homage to Bone Crack because you knew the villain at the start of Refusal as well. But what I loved about Bone Crack is the relationship between two fathers and two sons, and how the relationship between the sons affects the relationship between the fathers and the sons. And that I enjoyed that book hugely. But if I was going to recommend one other, I would think I would go for Banker. I remember my father. I took my father to Cheltenham Racecourse one day. I mean, I'd say I took him. I was the driver, and my mother was there as well. And my father came with us, and we went to the races. It wasn't during the festival; it was after that, and we ended up in someone's box who invited us in for a drink. And my father was chatting away to somebody, and then Dad always liked to leave before the last to escape the traffic. So he made his apologies, and we left. And we went down to the car park, and I got into the car. And my father was in the car, and my mother was in the car. And my father just suddenly said, hold on a minute. I'm just going back for a minute, for a little while. I want to ask someone a question. And my mother and I sat in the car, and we sat in the car, and we sat in the car, and the last race ran, and we sat in the car. And about 45 minutes later, my father reappeared and got into the car and said we could go now. And what he'd done is in the box where he was having a drink with a friend, he'd been introduced to a man who was a merchant banker. And he wanted to go back, and he went back to see this merchant banker. He didn't know what merchant banking was, and merchant banking is lending money, basically, to enterprises and companies and what have you. And he went back to this merchant banker and said, Michael, would you lend me £1 million to buy a stallion? Well, the banker was slightly taken back because no one had ever asked him that before. And he started asking my father questions. He didn't realize that it was research for a book. He thought he really wanted to buy a stallion for £1 million. And this was back in the early 1980s, where £1 million was a lot of money. I mean, it's still a lot of money, but you know what I mean. It was even more money then. And so the banker started talking to him, and Dad was taking it all in, and that became the storyline that the main character is a banker, and someone comes and asks him for £1 million to buy a stallion, and it's one of my favorite books. So my recommendation to you this time, Stephen, is to read Banker.
Well, thank you very much for that. I can see this is your third career, Felix, but your thriller writing career is really in your blood.
Oh, yes, I think so. Yes. I mean, I was a schoolmaster, then I was a businessman, but it gives me more joy, I think. I mean, I used to love A-level results day or hate it, depending on how well or badly my students had done. But I love the day of publication and of a new book, and it's just the biggest joy in the world is to have a book that people love, and it's in the blood. And I announced last week, as you heard at the book launch, that I've just got a new 2-book deal from my UK publisher and the US publisher. It doesn't mean it'll just be 2. I've just been having 2-book deals every 2 years for a long time now, but they both agreed to a new 2-book deal. And so I've got, you might say I've got a time to go yet in terms of this writing business.
Well, that's good to hear. Good luck with Syndicate, available from all good bookshops. And thank you again for joining us on the Paddock and the Pavilion.
Stephen, it's been a pleasure, as always, to talk to you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.